I want to start with a memory, not the hard ones. Those will come soon enough. I want to start with the last time I remember feeling completely safe. I was maybe 8 or 9 years old. It was a Friday afternoon, and my mother was sitting behind me on the floor of our small living room, braiding my hair. She had this way of humming while she worked. Not any particular song, just a low, warm sound that came from somewhere deep in her chest. The sunlight was coming through the window and landing on the carpet in a golden rectangle, and I was sitting right in the middle of it, feeling the warmth on my legs while her fingers moved through my hair. I remember the smell of the rice she had been cooking. I remember my little brother, Yusuf, sleeping on a cushion nearby, his mouth slightly open, his small chest rising and falling. I remember my mother's hands pausing for a moment on my head, just resting there, like a blessing she didn't have words for. That is the memory I hold on to, because everything that came after tried to erase it. My name now is Sarah, but I was born Aisha, in a city in the Middle East that I cannot name for reasons that will become clear as I tell you my story. I will not name my country. I will not name my city. I will not use real names for the people in my story. Not because I am ashamed, but because there are people who helped me who are still living there, still doing the work they did for me, and their safety matters more than the details. But what I will give you is the truth. Every emotion, every moment, every scar, and every miracle. That much I can give you, and I will.
Hello, viewers from around the world. Before our sister Sarah continues her story, we'd love to know where you are watching from, and we would love to pray for you and your city. Thank you, and may God bless you as you listen to this powerful testimony.
I grew up in a family that looked ordinary from the outside. We were not rich, but we were not begging either. My father had a small shop where he sold building supplies, cement, pipes, tiles, things like that. He worked long hours and came home smelling like dust and paint. My mother stayed home like most women in our neighborhood. She cooked, she cleaned, she raised us, she prayed. She was good at all of these things, especially the praying. 5 times a day, without fail, she would wash her hands and face and stand on her small prayer mat and bow toward Mecca. I used to watch her and think she looked beautiful in those moments, peaceful, like she was talking to someone who actually listened. My father was a different kind of person. I want to be careful here because I have spent many years being angry at him, and then many more years trying to forgive him. And I am still somewhere in the middle of that journey. He was not what you would call a cruel man. Not in the beginning. He did not beat us. He did not scream and throw things like some fathers I knew about in our neighborhood. But he was hard. He was rigid. He had ideas about how the world worked, about how families worked, about what daughters were for, and those ideas were like concrete walls. You could not move them. You could not reason with them. You could not even touch them without hurting yourself. He believed that a man's honor lived inside the behavior of his women, his wife, his daughters. We were the containers of his reputation, and he guarded us the way he would guard anything valuable. Not with love exactly, with control. There is a difference, and I learned it young. I had one great love as a child, and that was school. I loved learning. I loved reading. I loved the feeling of understanding something new, like a door opening in my mind. My teachers noticed. One of them, a woman I will never forget even though I cannot use her name, once kept me after class when I was about 12 years old. She told me that I was one of the brightest students she had taught. She said I could study medicine one day if I worked hard enough. She said I had the mind for it. I carried those words home inside me like a jewel. I did not tell my father. Even at 12, I knew that a daughter talking about becoming a doctor would not land well in our house. But I told my mother, and she smiled. It was a sad smile, though I didn't understand why at the time. She touched my face and said something like, "That's wonderful, my love." But her eyes were saying something else entirely. I think she already knew it was coming. Mothers often do. The trouble started when I was around 14. My father's business began to fail. I did not understand the details then. I was a child, and money was something that happened in the world of men behind closed doors that I was not invited through. But I could feel it. The way the air in our house changed, the way my parents' conversations got quieter and more tense, the way my mother started cooking with less meat than no meat. The way my father started coming home later, his face drawn tight like a fist. He had debts. I would learn later just how many and how large. He had borrowed from relatives, from friends, from people in the community. He had borrowed to keep the shop going, then borrowed more to pay back what he had already borrowed. It was a hole that kept getting deeper, and he kept digging. Among the people he owed money to was a man I will call Abu Karim. That is not his real name. But it is the name I will use here because his real name still makes my hands shake when I write it, and I would rather keep my hands steady for this telling. Abu Karim was a prominent man in our community. He was in his early to mid-60s at the time. Wealthy, well-connected, he owned properties and had business interests in several areas. His wife had died a few years earlier, and his grown children had mostly moved away to other cities or other countries. He lived alone in a large house and was respected by everyone. When he spoke at community gatherings, people listened. When he gave advice, people followed it. He was one of those men who moved through the world with the quiet confidence of someone who has never been told no. He and my father had known each other for years. They were not exactly friends. The gap in their wealth and status was too wide for real friendship. But they moved in the same circles, prayed at the same mosque, attended the same social functions. And my father owed him money. A lot of money. I began to notice Abu Karim at our house more often. He would come for tea, for dinner, for long conversations with my father in the sitting room while my mother and I served them and then disappeared. I noticed that my father treated him differently than he treated other guests. There was a nervousness to it, a desperation to please. My father laughed too loudly at Abu Karim's jokes. He agreed too quickly with Abu Karim's opinions. But he was performing something, and even at 14, I could feel it. I also noticed the way Abu Karim looked at me. It was not the way a kind uncle looks at a child. There was something assessing in it, something patient and calculating, like a man in a market studying an item he intends to buy but is in no rush because he knows the seller has no other offers. I told my mother once that Abu Karim made me uncomfortable. She went very still and then told me to go study. She did not say he was harmless. She did not tell me I was imagining it. She just went still, and that silence told me everything. Things moved slowly and then all at once. I remember my aunt visiting one afternoon. She and my mother were in the kitchen, and I was in the hallway, close enough to hear fragments of their conversation. My aunt's voice was sharp, angry. Full of disbelief. I caught pieces. She's a child. He's older than her own father. What kind of man agrees to this? My mother was crying softly, the way she always cried. Quiet, like even her grief needed permission. My aunt said something about how this was not Islam. This was just men using religion as a cover for their greed. My mother just kept weeping. I stood in that hallway and felt the ground beneath me become uncertain, like the floor itself was no longer solid. I did not fully understand what they were discussing, but my body understood. My chest tightened. My mouth went dry. Something terrible was taking shape in the rooms where I was not welcome, and it had my name on it. A few weeks later, my father called me into the sitting room. I remember every detail of that room. The brown sofa with the gold stitching that my mother kept covered in plastic. The glass coffee table with the tea set laid out on a tray. The smell of cardamom. And Abu Karim sitting in the best chair wearing a clean white thobe, his beard neatly trimmed, his hands resting on his knees. My father told me to sit down. I sat. He told me that I was going to marry Abu Karim. He said it the way you might announce a business arrangement, which I suppose it was. He explained that Abu Karim was a good man, a generous man, a man of standing. He said that this marriage would secure our family's future. He said that my brother's education would be taken care of, that the debts would be settled, that the family's honor would be preserved. He used that word, honor, as if honor was something you could buy by selling your daughter. I looked at Abu Karim. He was watching me with a small, calm smile. He looked satisfied. Not happy exactly. Satisfied. The way you look when a negotiation has gone your way. I looked at his hands. They were thick, spotted with age, the veins standing out like cords. I looked at his face, the deep lines, the loose skin at his neck, the gray in his beard. He was older than my own father. He could have been my grandfather. I asked my father quietly if I had a choice. I remember his face changing when I said that. The softness he had been performing for Abu Karim's benefit disappeared, and the real man underneath showed through. His jaw tightened, his eyes hardened. He told me that he was my father and that he knew what was best. The conversation was over. I left the room. I went to my bedroom. I sat on my bed and stared at the wall. I did not cry, I did not scream, I did not pound the walls or run away or do any of the things that people in movies do when their world ends. I just sat there, and I felt something inside me go quiet, like a flame being pinched between two fingers. Not a dramatic extinguishing, just a small, soft death of something that had been keeping me warm. My teacher had told me I could be a doctor. I had believed her. Sitting on that bed, I understood that I would never be a doctor. I would never be anything except what I was about to become, a payment. The wedding happened within a few weeks. There was no long engagement, no celebration, no joy. It was quick and functional, like signing a contract, which is essentially what it was. The Islamic marriage ceremony itself was brief. The imam came to our house. The mahr was set. The contract was signed. The dowry amount was so small it was almost insulting, but of course the real payment was happening in a different ledger. The debts were being cleared. The transaction was being completed. I wore a dress my mother had borrowed from a neighbor. It did not fit well. My mother helped me get ready, and her hands were shaking the entire time. At one point, while she was adjusting my headscarf, she held my face in both her hands and looked at me. Her eyes were red and swollen. She did not say much, but the few words she said are among the few exact words I remember from that time, because they burned into me. She asked me to forgive her. That was all. Forgive me. 2 words that told me she knew exactly what was happening and exactly how wrong it was, and she was powerless to stop it. I wonder sometimes if she had wanted to stop it, if she had fought behind closed doors, argued with my father, pleaded for my freedom. I believe she did, in whatever limited way she could. But in our world, a wife's objections were like wind against a stone wall. They might howl, but they changed nothing. The gathering was small, some relatives, some neighbors. The women congratulated me. Some of them looked at me with pity they tried to hide. Some of them looked at me with something worse, a kind of resignation, as if they were watching something they had seen before, something they accepted as simply the way things were. I smiled because I was expected to smile. I accepted congratulations because I was expected to accept them. I played the part of the happy bride because no one wanted to see the truth. And I had already learned that the world does not reward girls who tell the truth. After the gathering, I left my family's home with Abu Karim. I got into his car. The car was expensive, much nicer than anything my father had ever owned. It smelled like leather and cologne. Abu Karim drove without speaking much. He seemed relaxed, pleased with himself. He reached over at one point and patted my hand, the way you might pat a pet that had finally come to heel. We arrived at his house. It was large by the standards of our neighborhood. High walls, a metal gate, a courtyard with some plants that were beginning to dry out from neglect. The gate opened, the car pulled in, and the gate closed behind us. I heard it close. I heard the metal clang and the latch catch. That sound would live in my nightmares for years. I walked into his house and felt the air change. Everything was clean and expensive. The furniture was dark and heavy. The floors were marble. It was a kind of house that should have felt luxurious, but instead felt cold. There was no warmth in it, no softness. It was a house that had been decorated to impress, not to comfort. He showed me around briefly. The kitchen, the sitting room, the bedroom. I tried not to look at the bed. I tried not to think about what was coming. But my body knew. My body had known since the sitting room in my father's house. My body was already trying to leave before my mind gave it permission. That first night, I learned something about the human mind that I wish I had never needed to learn. I learned that when something is happening to you that you cannot stop, cannot fight, cannot escape, your mind has a way of leaving. It lifts out of your body like smoke and goes somewhere else. Somewhere safe, somewhere far away, somewhere the hands and the weight and the breath of a stranger who is now legally your husband cannot reach you. I went to that place many times over the next 7 years. I built an entire world there. A world where I was still a girl with a future, where my mother was still humming while she braided my hair, where a kind teacher was still telling me I could be a doctor. But every time the morning came and I was still in that bed, in that house, behind that gate, wearing a ring I never asked for, carrying a name I never chose. I was 19 years old. And I want you to understand something before I continue with my story. I was not a woman when this happened to me. I know that 19 is technically an adult in many places, but I had been a sheltered girl. I had no experience with the world. I had never made a decision for myself, never traveled alone, never handled money, never had a real conversation with a man outside my family. I was a child in every way that mattered, and I was handed to a man who was old enough to be my grandfather, and the world around me called it marriage. Everything I had was taken from me in the space of a few weeks. My education, my friendships, the few I had, my name, because Abu Karim rarely called me Aisha. I was the wife, or the girl, or simply you, my dreams, my autonomy, my voice. I prayed because that was the one thing no one could take from me. I performed the 5 daily prayers as I had been taught. I went through the motions. I said the words. But something had shifted inside me, a hairline crack in the foundation of everything I had been raised to believe. Because if God was good, if God was just, if God loved me, then how was I here? How had He allowed this? Was this truly his will for me, to be sold like furniture to settle a man's debts? I did not have the courage to say these things out loud. I barely had the courage to think them. But the questions were there, lodged in my chest like splinters, and every time I bowed my head in prayer, they pressed deeper. That is where my story begins. Not with the rescue, not with the miracle, but with the darkness, because I have learned that God often does his deepest work in the dark, in the silence, in the places where no one is watching and no one seems to care. He was there in that house with me, even when I did not know his name. He was watching, even when I thought no one was. But I am getting ahead of myself. Because before the rescue came the waiting, and the waiting nearly killed me. People sometimes ask me what those years were like, the years in Abu Karim's house, and I never quite know how to answer because the truth is, those years were not dramatic in the way people expect. When you hear about a woman trapped in a terrible marriage, you might imagine screaming fights, broken dishes, visible bruises, and some of that did come later, but mostly those years were quiet. A heavy, suffocating kind of quiet, the kind that presses down on your chest until you forget what it feels like to breathe freely. If I had to describe my life in that house in one word, I would say invisible. I was there, but I was not there. I existed, but I did not matter. I moved through the days like a shadow, performing the tasks that were expected of me, and no one saw me. Not really. Let me tell you what a typical day looked like. I woke early, usually before the first call to prayer. Abu Karim expected his breakfast at a certain time, prepared in a certain way. Tea with exactly 2 spoons of sugar, eggs fried but not too crispy, bread warmed but not toasted, olives and cheese set out in small dishes arranged neatly. I learned these preferences quickly because the consequences of getting them wrong were not worth the lesson. After breakfast, I cleaned. The house was large for one woman to maintain, and Abu Karim did not believe in hiring help. That was what a wife was for, in his view. I swept the marble floors, wiped down the heavy furniture, scrubbed the bathrooms, washed the dishes. I did the laundry by hand because he preferred it that way, even though there was a machine. I cooked lunch and dinner from scratch every day using recipes his late wife had used because he wanted things the way they had always been. Between the cleaning and the cooking, there was nothing. I had no television of my own to watch. I had no books except the Quran. I had no phone, not in the early years. I had no friends, no visitors, no one to talk to during the long afternoon hours when Abu Karim was out attending to his business interests or sitting in the coffee shops with other men, discussing politics and religion and the state of the world, while his young wife sat alone behind walls and wondered if the world even remembered she existed. I talked to myself sometimes, not in a crazy way. Just small things. I would narrate what I was doing while I cooked, like a television host in my own kitchen. I would sing quietly, the songs my mother used to hum, trying to remember the melodies. I would have conversations with people who were not there, imagining what I would say to my old school friends if I could see them, imagining what they would say back. There was a jasmine bush in the courtyard. It was half dead when I arrived, neglected since Abu Karim's wife had passed. I started caring for it without really thinking about why. I watered it, pruned it, talked to it. When it bloomed for the first time in the spring of my second year in that house, I sat on the ground next to it and cried. It was the first beautiful thing I had seen in months, and it felt like a message, though from whom I did not know. Something can survive neglect. The jasmine seemed to say, Something can bloom even in a place where no one is watching. There is also a stray cat that started coming around, a thin orange tabby with a torn ear. I fed it scraps of food when Abu Karim was not home. He did not like animals in the house. The cat would sit on the courtyard wall and look at me with its gold eyes, and I would look back, and we understood each other. We were both creatures surviving on the edges of someone else's world. Abu Karim was not violent in the beginning. I want to be honest about that. He did not hit me, not in the early years. What he did was subtler and in some ways harder to name. He controlled everything. What I wore, what I cooked, when I spoke, who I could see, which was almost no one. He decided when I could visit my family, which was rare and always supervised. He decided when we would be intimate, which was his decision and never mine. He decided what I needed and what I did not need, and what I needed, according to him, was very little. He was generous with material things in his own way. The house was comfortable. There was always food. He bought me clothes, practical things, nothing beautiful or chosen by me. He would have said, if anyone had asked, that he provided well for his wife. And by the standards of the world we lived in, perhaps he did. But provision without freedom is just a well-furnished cage. What wore me down was not one big thing, but 1,000 small ones. The way he spoke to me like I was a child. The way he corrected my cooking in front of the rare guest. The way he told me what to think about the news, about religion, about the neighbors, about everything. The way he made me feel that my own thoughts and feelings were irrelevant, that I was a function, not a person. I existed to serve, to obey, and to be available. He reminded me regularly of my debt, not always with words. Sometimes it was just a look, a tone, a reference to my father's situation. He had saved my family from disgrace. He had paid off the debts. He had been generous beyond what anyone could expect. And in return, he expected obedience. Total, unquestioning obedience. He expected gratitude. He expected me to understand that I was lucky. Lucky that a man of his status had agreed to take me. Lucky that I was not on the street. Lucky that I had a roof and food and a husband who did not beat me. Lucky. That word makes me sick to this day. He talked about his late wife often, always in comparison. She knew how to keep a house properly. She never questioned his decisions. She was grateful. She understood her role. The message was clear. I was a poor replacement, and I should work harder to be worthy of the position I had been sold into. He used religion as a tool of control. And this is something I need to talk about because it shaped not just my marriage, but my entire understanding of God for years. Abu Karim was a religious man. He prayed 5 times a day. He fasted during Ramadan. He gave charity publicly and made sure people knew about it. He quoted the Quran and the Hadith constantly, and he always had a verse ready to justify whatever he wanted. When I was reluctant at night, he had verses about a wife's duty. When I expressed an opinion he disagreed with, he had verses about obedience. When I cried, he had verses about patience and submission to God's will. He wrapped his control in the language of faith, and because I had been raised to respect that language, to fear questioning it, his words had power over me. They got inside me. They became the voice in my own head, telling me that to resist was to sin, that to be unhappy was to be ungrateful, that to question my situation was to question God himself. For a long time, I believed it, or I tried to believe it. I told myself that this was God's will, that suffering in silence was noble, that patience was rewarded in the afterlife, even if this life was unbearable. I kept praying the 5 daily prayers, going through the motions, saying the words, bowing and prostrating on my prayer mat in the corner of the bedroom while Abu Karim watched television in the next room. But the prayers felt empty. They felt like talking to a ceiling. I moved my lips, but nothing moved in my heart. And slowly, so slowly, I almost didn't notice it happening. I began to wonder if the God I was praying to was the same God who made the stars and the jasmine and the sunset I could sometimes see from the courtyard. Because the God they taught me about, the God Abu Karim quoted, the God of the lectures at the mosque, that God seemed mostly concerned with rules and punishment and submission. And the God I sometimes felt in the stillness of the courtyard at dawn, the one I sensed in the blooming of the jasmine and the gold eyes of the stray cat, that God felt different, warmer, closer, sadder somehow about what was happening to me. I did not have the language for this yet. I did not know words like deconstruction or spiritual crisis. I just knew that something was breaking inside my faith, and I did not know whether that breaking was a tragedy or a beginning. The years blurred together. That is something people don't tell you about suffering. It is not always sharp. Sometimes it is dull, gray, endless. One day bleeding into the next until you cannot remember which year it is without counting on your fingers. I marked time by small things. The seasons of the jasmine bush, the changing of the light across the courtyard, the holy months and holidays that came and went, bringing brief disruptions to the routine, but never any real change. I never became pregnant. This is a painful thing to talk about, even now, because it became the source of so much additional shame and humiliation. Abu Karim wanted children. Specifically, he wanted a son. His grown children from his first marriage were scattered and distant, and he wanted a new legacy. When the months passed and nothing happened, he blamed me. He called me barren. He said I was defective. He said that God was punishing me for some hidden sin. He took me to doctors. These visits were among the most humiliating experiences of my life. I sat in waiting rooms with women who were there by choice, women with loving husbands, women who wanted babies. And then I was examined like livestock while Abu Karim waited outside, and the doctors spoke about my body as if I were not in the room. The results always came back normal. There was nothing wrong with me. The unspoken truth, the one no one would say, was that Abu Karim was in his late 60s when we married and in his 70s now. His age was the most likely factor, but in our culture, in our world, infertility was always the woman's fault, and no doctor was going to tell a wealthy, powerful man that the problem might be his. The failure to produce a child made everything worse. Whatever small value I had in Abu Karim's eyes diminished further. He began talking openly about taking a second wife. A younger one, he said. A fertile one. He said this in front of me casually, the way you might discuss replacing a piece of furniture that had not lived up to expectations. The threat hung over me constantly. I did not know whether to hope he would do it because a second wife might take some of his attention away from me, or to fear it because it would confirm what everyone already seemed to believe, that I was worthless. I thought about escape, but the thought always collapsed under its own weight. Where would I go? My family would not take me back. I felt certain of that. A divorced woman, or worse, a runaway wife, was a source of shame that my father would never accept. I had no money. Abu Karim kept all the finances. I had no identification. He kept my documents locked away, and I do not know where. I had no education beyond what I had completed as a teenager, No work experience, no skills that the outside world would value. I did not even know how to navigate a city by myself because I had never been allowed to. The walls of my prison were not just the physical walls of that house. They were the walls of a system, a culture, a set of beliefs that had been built around me since birth. Even if I climbed over the physical walls, the other walls would follow me wherever I went. Or so I believed at the time. I thought about ending my own life. I want to be honest about that because I think it is important and because I know there are women listening to this who are in the same dark place I was, and I want them to know they are not alone in those thoughts. There were nights when I lay in bed and calculated the ways. There were mornings when I stood in the kitchen holding a knife and wondered. There was one particular evening when I stood on the rooftop and looked down at the street below and thought about how easy it would be, how quick. I did not do it. Not because I was strong, not because I had hope, but because something in me, something stubborn and wordless and deeper than despair, refused to let go. I think now that it was God, holding on to me even when I could not hold on to anything. But at the time, I did not recognize it as God. I just knew that something in me would not give up, even when I wanted to. Around the 5th year of my marriage, something changed. It was a small change, so small that Abu Karim probably did not think much of it. His adult son, who lived in another country, had been pressuring him to modernize a little, to make life easier for himself. Part of this involved getting Sarah a basic phone so she could manage deliveries, communicate with the family when needed, and not require Abu Karim to handle every small domestic detail. Abu Karim agreed. Not out of kindness, but out of convenience. He bought me a simple smartphone. It was an older model, nothing expensive. He set it up with restrictions, though he was not very technologically skilled, so the restrictions were not as thorough as he intended. That phone changed everything. It was my window, my tiny, glowing window into a world I had almost forgotten existed. Slowly, carefully, terrified of being caught, I began to explore. At first, it was small things. News, weather, recipes that had nothing to do with Abu Karim's preferences. But then I began to read more broadly. I discovered articles and forums and websites where women talked about their lives. Women who worked, who traveled, who made their own decisions, women who laughed and argued and created and loved freely. It was like being shown a color I had never seen before. I did not have a name for what I felt reading about these women's lives. It was not jealousy exactly. It was grief. A vast, deep grief for the life I had not been allowed to live, for the person I had not been allowed to become. I also found, almost by accident, online forums where Muslim women discussed the very verses Abu Karim used to control me. Some of these women were scholars. Some were just ordinary wives and mothers who had started asking questions. They dissected the verses. They provided context. They argued that the way these texts were being used to silence and subjugate women was a distortion, not a faithful reading. I devoured these discussions. I did not agree with everything I read, but the simple act of encountering people who questioned what I had been told was unquestionable felt like oxygen after years underwater. My mind was waking up. And once a mind starts waking up, it is very hard to put it back to sleep. I was not ready to leave Islam. The thought was too enormous, too terrifying. Islam was not just my religion. It was my entire identity. In my culture, my family, the fabric of every relationship and social structure I had ever known. To leave it would be to leave everything, to become nothing, to be no one. but I had begun to sense a distinction that I could not yet articulate. The God of Abu Karim's lectures and the God who made the jasmine bloom might not be the same God. The God who was used to justify my sale might not be the God who put those stubborn sparks of hope in my chest on the nights I wanted to die. There was a gap between the religion I had been handed and the God I was beginning to sense, and that gap was widening. Then my mother died. She had visited me a few months before it happened. It was one of the rare visits Abu Karim permitted. She came to the house and sat with me in the courtyard, and I was shocked by how much she had aged. She was thin, much thinner than I remembered. Her hair had gone almost completely gray. Her hands trembled slightly when she held her tea. We sat together, and she held my hand. She told me she prayed for me every day. I asked her, without planning to, without thinking it through, why she had let this happen to me. It came out of me like something I had been holding in my throat for years. She cried. She told me she had no power. She said my father had decided and that she had begged him, but it had made no difference. And then she told me something I had never known. She said that her own mother had been given away in the same manner, and her mother's mother before that. We are a chain, she told me. She had hoped the chain would break with me. She was sorry it had not. We sat in silence after that, holding hands, but two women in a courtyard full of jasmine saying nothing because there was nothing left to say. She left that afternoon. I watched her walk to the gate and she turned back once and looked at me. I think she knew. I think she felt it. Mothers know things they cannot explain. 3 months later, word came through a cousin that my mother had died. A heart attack, they said. She was not old. She was only in her mid-50s. But she had lived a life that ages you in ways the years cannot account for. Abu Karim did not allow me to attend the funeral. He said it was too much trouble, too far to travel, too complicated to arrange. He said I could pray for her from home. He said it as if he were denying me permission to go to the market, not to bury my mother. I grieved alone. I grieved on the floor of the bedroom, pressing my face into the carpet to muffle the sound, because even my sorrow needed to be quiet in that house. I grieved for my mother, for her life, for the change she had described, for the fact that she died knowing her daughter was trapped and she could not free her. Something broke in me that day, but it was not the kind of breaking I had experienced before. Those earlier breaks had been destructive. They had been the breaking of my spirit, my hope, my sense of self. This break was different. This was the breaking of my acceptance, my tolerance, my willingness to stay in this life and wait for it to kill me too. I did not know what I was going to do. I did not have a plan. But I knew with a certainty that went deeper than thought that I could not die in this house. Not like my mother had died, full of regret and powerlessness. Not like my grandmother and her mother before her. The chain had to break. It had to break with me. A few weeks after my mother's death, on a hot, still night when Abu Karim had gone to bed early, I climbed the stairs to the flat roof of the house. I had been up there before, to hang laundry, to escape the heat of the kitchen, but tonight I went up there for a different reason. I sat on the concrete surface, still warm from the day's sun, and I looked up at the sky. The stars were out. Not all of them. The city lights hid most of them, but enough. Enough to remind me that the world was bigger than my walls, bigger than my husband's house, bigger than the life I had been forced into. And I prayed, but not the way I had been taught, not in Arabic, not facing Mecca, not with the prescribed words and postures. I just talked, out loud, In my own language, in my own broken, exhausted, desperate words, I told God that I didn't know his name anymore. I told him I wasn't sure if he was the God they had taught me about, because that God seemed far away and unconcerned with girls like me. I told him I didn't even know if he was listening, but I told him that if he was real, if he was good, I needed him to rescue me. I told him I had nothing left. No strength, no plan, no hope. I told him that if he didn't come for me, I would disappear, and nobody would even notice I was gone. The night air moved against my face. The stars blinked. The city hummed its distant hum, and for the first time in so long that I had forgotten what it felt like, I sensed that I was not alone, not in a dramatic way, not with thunder or a voice from the sky, just a quiet, steady presence. Like someone sitting beside me in the dark, saying nothing but being there, just being there. I stayed on that roof for a long time. Then I went back downstairs and fell into bed, drained and empty and somehow impossibly a little bit lighter. That night, I dreamed, and everything changed. I need you to understand something before I describe what happened that night. I am not a person who believes things easily. I was not raised to be mystical or emotional about faith. In my upbringing, religion was a set of rules, duties, obligations. You did what you were told. You prayed what you were told to pray. You believed what you were told to believe. Visions and dreams and miraculous encounters, those were for the old stories, for the prophets, not for ordinary people. Certainly not for a miserable young woman on a rooftop in the middle of the night. So when I tell you what I dreamed, I am not telling you because I expect you to believe it easily. I am telling you because it happened. And it was more real than anything that has ever happened to me in my waking life. More real than the walls of that house. More real than the years of silence. More real than the hands that held me down or the words that tore me apart. This dream was the most real thing I have ever experienced, and I will carry it with me until the day I die. I fell asleep that night with my face still damp from the tears I had cried on the rooftop. I was exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that goes deeper than your body, that lives in your bones and your soul. I expected nothing. I had cried out to a God I was not even sure existed, and I had come back inside and laid down on my bed with the resignation of someone who has thrown a message in a bottle into a vast ocean and does not really expect anyone to find it. But someone found it. The dream began with silence. Not the heavy, suffocating silence of Abu Karim's house. A different kind of silence, a living silence, the kind you feel in the early morning before the world wakes up, when everything is still and the air itself seems to be waiting for something. I was standing in a field. I do not know where this field was. It did not look like anywhere I had ever been. The grass was green, a deep, impossible green, the kind of green I had only seen in photographs of places I would never visit. It stretched out in every direction, rolling gently, and above it, the sky was vast and clear and full of a light that did not seem to come from any particular source. It was just there, everywhere, warm and golden and alive. I looked down at my hands. They were my hands. I was myself, but I felt different, lighter. The weight I had been carrying for years, the weight in my chest, the weight on my shoulders, it was not there. I breathed in, and it was the first full breath I could remember taking. My lungs expanded completely, without the tight band of anxiety that had lived around my ribs for so long I had forgotten it was there. And then I saw him. He was walking toward me across the field. A man. Not rushing, not hesitating, walking with the steady, unhurried pace of someone who knows exactly where he is going and has all the time in the world. He was dressed in white, but I need to be careful with that word because what he was wearing was not white the way a shirt is white or a wall is white. It was white the way light is white. It glowed. It moved. It was as if the fabric was woven from the same warm light that filled the sky. His face. I have spent years trying to describe his face, and I always fail. It was kind. That is the closest word I have, but it is not enough. His face held a kindness so deep and so complete that it made every other kindness I had ever received look like a shadow of the real thing. His eyes, they were the part I remember most clearly. Looking into his eyes was like looking into someone who knew everything about me, every ugly thought, every moment of weakness, every sin, every wound, everything I had ever done and everything that had ever been done to me and loved me anyway. Not in spite of those things, not by ignoring them, but with a love so vast that it held all of it without flinching. I was afraid. Not the kind of fear I knew from my life with Abu Karim. That was the fear of pain, of punishment, of a raised hand. This was different. This was awe. This was standing before something so enormous and so holy and so good that my own smallness was overwhelming. I felt like a candle standing before the sun, not insignificant, just utterly outshone. He reached me and stopped. He stood close, close enough that I could feel warmth radiating from him the way heat radiates from a fire, but gentle, so gentle. He reached out his hand. His hand was open, palm up, offered, not grabbing, not demanding, not taking, offering. I looked at that hand and something in my chest cracked open, because in my entire life, no hand had ever been extended to me like that. Every hand I had known had been a hand that controlled, directed, struck, or restrained. This hand was asking. This hand was inviting. This hand was saying, without words, you can choose. I put my hand in his. And when our hands touched, warmth flooded through me, starting in my fingers, running up my arm, spreading through my chest and my stomach, and down through my legs and into the soles of my feet. It was like being filled with warm honey or sunlight or love itself in liquid form. Every part of me that had been cold and dead and numb for years began to wake up. I could feel my own heartbeat, and it was steady. And it was not afraid. He spoke. His voice was like his eyes. It held everything: authority and tenderness, power and gentleness. Like it was the voice of someone who could command armies and also comfort a child. And he used that voice to say words to me, words that I will remember with perfect clarity until my last breath on this earth and probably beyond. He told me that I was not property. He told me I was his daughter. I need to stop here for a moment because I don't think I can adequately explain what those words did to me. You have to understand. For 7 years, I had been treated as a thing, an object, a function, something that was purchased and owned and used. My value was measured in the debts I had canceled by being handed over. My worth was discussed in terms of what I could produce, which was nothing, because I could not even give Abu Karim the child he wanted. I had been told in 1,000 ways, some spoken and some silent, that I was worthless, that I was lucky anyone wanted me at all, that I should be grateful for the cage I lived in because at least it had a roof. And here was this man, this radiant, glowing, impossibly beautiful man, looking at me with eyes that held the weight of eternity. And he was calling me daughter, not wife, not property, not girl, not servant. Daughter. I fell to my knees. Not because I was told to, not because I was performing a ritual. I fell because my legs could not hold me anymore under the weight of what I was feeling. It was like every wall I had built inside myself to survive, every defense, every numbness, every layer of armor I had wrapped around my heart to keep it from being destroyed, all of it collapsed at once. And what was underneath was not emptiness. It was a wound so raw and so deep that only those words could reach it. And then he did something that undid me completely. He knelt down with me. He got down on the ground in that beautiful green field in his clothes made of light, and he knelt beside me. He came down to where I was. Do you understand what that meant? In my world, powerful men did not kneel. Important men did not lower themselves. Authority meant standing above, looking down, demanding that others rise to your level or be crushed beneath it. But this man, who radiated more power and authority than anyone I had ever encountered, chose to come down to the ground where I had fallen. He chose to be with me in my lowest place. He told me more things. He told me that he had seen every tear I had cried. Everyone. He said that he had counted every night as if each one mattered, as if each dark hour I had endured was noted and remembered and held. He told me that the ones who sold me did not speak for him. That struck me like lightning because it answered the question that had been torturing me for years. Was God behind what had been done to me? Did God approve of my sale? Did God look at a girl being traded like livestock and nod his head in agreement? No. The ones who sold me did not speak for him. What was done to me was not his will. It was not his plan. It was the cruelty of broken people in a broken world, and he had been grieving it right alongside me. He told me that he had a name for me, a new name and a new life. He told me not to be afraid. He said he was going to come and get me. He said I was never forgotten, never worthless, and that I had always been his. Always. Not since the dream. Not since I cried out on the rooftop. Always, before I was sold, before I was born, before the world was made, always his. I was weeping in a way I had never wept before. Not the silent, strangled tears I cried into pillows to keep Abu Karim from hearing. These were free tears, loud, shaking, full-body tears, the kind of crying that comes from a place so deep it doesn't have a name. And I was not ashamed of them, which was new. I had been taught that excessive emotion was weakness, that a good woman controlled herself. But in that field, with that man kneeling beside me, my tears felt holy. They felt like they were supposed to happen, like they were part of the healing. I asked him who he was. I could barely get the words out through my weeping, but I needed to know. Everything in me needed to know. He smiled, and that smile. I cannot describe it and do it justice. It was the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. It was a smile that held joy and sorrow and love and knowledge and a promise all at once. It was the smile of someone who has been waiting for you to ask the right question. He told me I would find him. He said to search, and I would find him. He said he was the way. Then he placed his hand on my head, gently, like a father blessing a child, like the hand my mother used to rest on my head when she paused in the braiding, and warmth poured through me again, but this time it went deeper. It went into the broken places, the places where hope had died, the places where my identity had been crushed, the places where I had stopped believing I was human. The warmth went there, and it did not fix everything all at once, but it planted something, a seed, a beginning. And then I woke up. I did not move for a long time. I lay in that bed, in that room, in that house of my captivity, and I stared at the ceiling, and I felt something I had not felt in 7 years. Peace. Not happiness exactly, not the giddy excitement of a problem solved. Peace, a deep, settled, unshakable peace that sat in my chest like a warm stone and did not move. I touched my hand, the hand he had held. I know this sounds strange. I know you might think I was imagining things, but my hand felt warm. It felt like it had been held. There was a physical sensation that lingered, and I lay there pressing my own hand and marveling at it. Abu Karim was asleep beside me, snoring lightly. The room was dark. Everything around me was exactly the same as it had been when I fell asleep. Nothing in my external world had changed, but everything inside me had shifted, like tectonic plates moving deep beneath the surface. The landscape of my inner world would never be the same. I got up that morning and went through my routine. Breakfast, cleaning, cooking, serving, silence. But I moved through it differently. There was something inside me that Abu Karim could not see and could not touch. A secret treasure, a hidden fire. I kept replaying his words in my mind. You are not property. You are my daughter. And every time I heard them, the warmth returned. I did not tell Abu Karim anything. I had spent years learning to hide my inner world from him. This was the most precious thing I had ever been given, and I was not going to lay it before a man who would trample it. But I needed to understand what had happened to me. The dream was unlike anything I had ever experienced, but I had no framework for it. In my religious upbringing, dreams could be significant, but they were usually interpreted within the bounds of Islamic theology. A man in white, a message of love and rescue, being called daughter by a divine figure, none of this fit into the categories I had been given. Over the following days, using the phone Abu Karim had given me, exercising extreme caution, deleting my search history after every session, I began to search. I typed the simplest things into the search bar. Dream of man in white robes, dream of being called daughter by God. Bright figure in a dream who says, do not be afraid. What I found shattered me. There were testimonies, dozens of them, hundreds, from Iran, from Egypt, from Pakistan, from Saudi Arabia, from Afghanistan, from Turkey, from Indonesia, from countries all across the Muslim world. Men and women, young and old, from every background, all telling the same story. They had dreamed of a man in white, a man whose face radiated love. A man who spoke with authority and tenderness, a man who reached out his hand and said words that went straight to the deepest wounds of their hearts. And they all said the same thing about who he was. They said it was Jesus, Isaiah. I knew the name. In Islam, Isa is recognized as a prophet, a messenger of God, born of the Virgin Mary. He is respected, honored even, but he is not God. He is not the Son of God. He did not die on a cross according to Islamic teaching. He was a man, a great man, but just a man. To say otherwise was blasphemy. It was the one thing that Islam and Christianity disagreed on most fiercely. And it was the one thing I was now being confronted with in the most personal and undeniable way possible. I read testimony after testimony, and my hands shook. I read about a woman in Iran who had been imprisoned by her family for refusing an arranged marriage and had dreamed of a man in white who walked through the locked door of her room and took her hand. I read about a man in Egypt who had planned to take his own life and dreamed of a figure in blazing white who held him and said, he had died so this man could live. I read about a teenager in Pakistan who had never met a Christian, never seen a Bible, never heard the gospel, and who dreamed of a man who identified himself as Isa and told her to find his book. These people did not know each other. They were from different countries, different cultures, different circumstances. They had no connection to each other except this. They had all met the same person, and that person was Jesus. I was terrified. You need to understand the magnitude of what I was facing. This was not a matter of choosing a different flavor of ice cream or switching to a different political party. In my world, leaving Islam was the ultimate betrayal. It was apostasy. In some interpretations of Islamic law, it was punishable by death. Even where the law did not go that far, the social consequences were total. You lost your family. You lost your community. You lost your identity. You became a walking shame, a living insult to everyone who had ever known you. And yet, I could not unfeel what I had felt. I could not unsee those eyes. I could not unhear those words. You are not property. You are my daughter. Whatever the cost, whatever the danger, I could not pretend that dream had not happened. I could not go back to the empty prayers and the heavy silence and pretend that nothing had changed. Something had changed. Everything had changed. I found an Arabic Bible online. This was perhaps the most dangerous thing I had ever done. If Abu Karim found this on my phone, I did not want to think about what would happen, but I could not stop. I had to know more about this Isa, this Jesus who had visited me in my sleep and spoken words that were still reverberating through every part of my being. I started reading the Gospel of John because one of the testimonies I had read online mentioned it as a good place to begin. And from the very first verse, I felt electricity. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. I read that verse over and over. The Word was God. This was saying something so different from what I had been taught. This was saying that God was not distant, not removed, not sitting in heaven issuing commands and keeping score. God was the Word. God was communication. God was reaching out, speaking, making himself known. God was not waiting for us to climb up to him. He was coming down. I kept reading. I read about Jesus turning water into wine at a wedding, about his mother asking him to help, about him caring about something as ordinary and human as a celebration. I read about Nicodemus coming to Jesus at night, in secret, afraid to be seen, asking questions he was not supposed to ask. I thought, that is me. I am Nicodemus, coming in the dark, afraid, asking. And then I read about the Samaritan woman at the well. And I had to put the phone down because I could not see the screen through my tears. A woman, an outcast, someone who came to the well at the hottest part of the day because she was avoiding the other women who judged her. A woman with a complicated history, multiple marriages, a current situation that did not meet anyone's approval. A woman who expected nothing from the Jewish teacher sitting by the well except maybe contempt. And Jesus talked to her. He saw her. He knew her entire story, every messy detail, and instead of condemning her, he offered her living water, water that would quench her thirst forever. He did not lecture her. He did not shame her. He did not use her past as a weapon. He met her exactly where she was, at a well, in the heat, in the middle of her broken life, and he offered her something no one else ever had. Himself. I was that woman. I was standing at the well, carrying my jar, weighed down by a life I had not chosen, expecting nothing but more of the same. And Jesus was there, waiting, offering. I read the story of the woman caught in adultery. The men dragged her before Jesus, ready to stone her, quoting the law, righteous in their fury. And Jesus bent down and wrote in the dirt and said the thing that silenced every one of them. Let the one who has no sin throw the first stone. And one by one they walked away. And he looked at her and did not condemn her. He told her to go and live differently, but he did not condemn her. I thought of Abu Karim quoting verses at me through a locked door. I thought of the Imam lecturing me about hellfire. I thought of all the men who had used the words of God as stones to throw at women who had no defense. And I thought of Jesus, kneeling in the dust, defending a woman everyone else wanted to destroy. I read about the cross. This was the hardest part and the most important. In Islam, I had been taught that Jesus was not crucified, that God rescued him and took him to heaven and someone else was put on the cross in his place. But the gospel told a different story. It told me that Jesus chose the cross, that he was not a victim of it, but a volunteer, that he could have called down armies of angels, could have walked away, could have saved himself, but he didn't. He stayed. He bled. He suffered. He died for me. I sat with that thought for a long time. I sat with it the way you sit with something too big to hold, turning it over and over, each trying to find a way to contain it. God did not stay in heaven and send down rules and requirements and wait for me to measure up. God came down. God became a man. God walked among the broken and the poor and the outcast and the sold. God was beaten and mocked and spit upon and nailed to a piece of wood. God died, and he did it because he loved me, not humanity in some abstract theological sense. Me, Aisha, the girl who was sold for the price of her father's debts, the wife who was invisible, the woman who cried out on a rooftop to a God she didn't know. He loved me, specifically, individually, by name. He thought I was worth dying for. That understanding did not come to me all at once. It came in layers, like dawn. First, just a lightening of the darkness, then the first colors, then the warmth, then the full, blazing reality of the sun. Over the following weeks and months, reading secretly, praying in the dark, hiding my phone under my pillow and my faith under my practiced mask of obedience, I came to believe that Jesus was who he said he was, the Son of God, the Savior, the way, the truth, and the life. The man in the white robes who had knelt beside me in a field of impossible green and called me daughter. I became a secret believer. I prayed at night silently, lying in bed or sitting on the rooftop when Abu Karim was asleep. These prayers were nothing like the prayers of my upbringing. There were no prescribed words, no required postures, no ritual washing. I just talked. I talked to Jesus the way you would talk to someone sitting beside you. I told him about my day. I told him my fears. I told him my grief about my mother. I thanked him for the dream. I asked him questions I did not yet have answers to. I asked him to help me understand what I was supposed to do now. I read scripture whenever I could, always with one ear listening for Abu Karim's footsteps. I memorized verses, writing them in my mind the way prisoners carve messages into walls. I did this deliberately because I had a feeling that the phone would not always be available to me, and I wanted the words stored somewhere Abu Karim could not find and could not take. He could take my phone. He could not take what I had written on my heart. I began to change, not outwardly. I was too careful, too practiced in deception, too aware of the danger to let anything show on the surface. But inside, the transformation was seismic. The bitterness that had been eating me alive for years, the acid that had corroded my ability to hope or trust or see beauty in anything, it began to soften, not disappear, soften, like ice slowly melting. I started to feel things I had not felt in years. hope. Not a hope that my circumstances would change because I had no reason to believe they would, but hope that I was loved, that I mattered, that my life, this painful, stolen, wasted life, had a meaning and a purpose that went beyond these walls, that I was not just a debt payment. I was a daughter of the living God, and nothing that had been done to me could change that. I even began to pray for Abu Karim. This was perhaps the hardest thing I have ever done. Jesus said to pray for those who persecute you, to love your enemies, to bless those who curse you. When I first read those words, I thought they were impossible. How could I pray for the man who had bought me, caged me, used me, silenced me? How could I bless the man whose hands I flinched from every night? I did not do it with feeling, not at first. I did it with gritted teeth and clenched fists as an act of raw obedience. I said the words because Jesus asked me to say them, not because I meant them. But over time, something shifted, not into affection. I did not and do not love Abu Karim, but into a kind of pity. I began to see him not just as my oppressor, but as a man who was himself imprisoned by his own pride, his own need for control, his own distorted understanding of God. He was a captive too, even though his cage was made of gold. I prayed for his freedom, even as I longed for my own. The peace in me grew. It sat in my chest like a second heartbeat, steady and warm and inexplicable. And it must have shown, despite my best efforts to hide it, because Abu Karim began to notice. He looked at me differently, suspiciously. He could not put his finger on what had changed, but he sensed it the way an animal senses a shift in the weather. I was not cowering the same way. My eyes were different. There was something in me that he could not access, could not control, and it unsettled him deeply. He was a man who needed to own everything about the people in his orbit, especially the woman who lived under his roof, and he was encountering something in me that was beyond his reach. He asked me one evening what I was smiling about. I had not realized I was smiling. I told him it was nothing. He stared at me for a long time, his eyes narrow, calculating. I could feel him trying to figure out what was different, trying to identify the threat. I went to bed that night and prayed with my face pressed into the pillow. I thanked Jesus for the peace. I thanked him for the dream. I thanked him for making himself known to me, and I asked him to protect me from what I sensed was coming, because I had learned enough about the world to know that peace and faith and freedom are threats to people who build their power on fear and control. Abu Karim had not figured out what had changed in me, but he would. It was only a matter of time. I had found the truth. And the truth was dangerous because it was setting me free from the inside. And freedom, even internal freedom, even secret freedom, is the most threatening thing in the world to a man who needs you to stay enslaved. The storm was coming. I could feel it gathering. But for the first time in my life, I was not facing it alone. I had a hand to hold. A hand that had been extended to me in a field of light, open and warm and undemanding. And I was holding on with everything I had. I have told you about the silence, about the years of invisible suffering, about the dream that broke through the darkness like a shaft of light into a sealed room. Now, I need to tell you about the day everything came apart. And I need you to understand that what I am about to describe was the most terrifying experience of my life. More terrifying than the wedding night. More terrifying than the years of emptiness. Because this time, I had something to lose. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I had hope. I had faith. I had Jesus, and someone was about to try to take all of that away from me. It was a Thursday. I remember this because earlier that day, I had been reading the story of a Peter walking on water. You know the story. Jesus is standing on the sea in the middle of a storm, and he tells Peter to come to him, and Peter gets out of the boat and actually walks on the water, and it is a miracle. And then Peter looks at the waves and gets afraid and starts to sink, and Jesus reaches out and catches him. I had read that story and thought about it all morning. I thought about how Peter had to get out of the boat. He had to step onto something that should not have held him. He had to trust that the voice calling him was stronger than the storm trying to drown him. And I thought about my own boat, this terrible marriage, this house, this life. And I thought about the voice that had called to me in the dream, the voice that said, "Do not be afraid," the voice that said, "I was coming for you." And I wondered if my Peter moment was coming, if I would have to step out onto the impossible and trust that he would hold me. I did not know that the answer was already hours away. Abu Karim had been out for most of the afternoon. He came home earlier than I expected. I was in the bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed, phone in my hand, the Arabic Bible app open to the Gospel of Matthew. I heard the front door open and close, heard his footsteps in the hallway, and my body reacted before my mind did. I moved to close the app, to switch to something innocent, to hide the evidence, but I was not fast enough. Or maybe I was. Maybe he did not see the screen in that particular moment, but he saw something. He saw me fumble. He saw the guilt flash across my face. He saw me hiding, and Abu Karim was the kind of man who needed to know what was being hidden from him. He did not say anything then. He went to the sitting room, ate the dinner I served him, watched television, and went through his normal evening routine. I watched him carefully, the way I always watched him, reading his moods like a sailor reads the sky. He seemed normal. I began to breathe again. Maybe I had imagined the suspicion in his eyes. Maybe he had not noticed anything. I fell asleep that night with the phone tucked under my pillow. This was my routine. I would read scripture late at night when Abu Karim was snoring, then tuck the phone under the pillow and sleep. I was always careful to close the apps, to clear the history. Always. But that night, I had been reading the story of Peter. I had been moved. I had been praying. I had been lost in the words, and I forgot. For the first time in months, I forgot to close the Bible app before falling asleep. I woke to him standing over me. The room was dark. It was the middle of the night, maybe 2 or 3 in the morning. He was standing beside the bed, fully awake, and he was holding my phone. The screen was on, casting a blue-white glow across his face, and his expression was something I had never seen before. It was beyond anger. It was a kind of cold, horrified fury, like a man who has just discovered that the walls of his house have been infested with something he cannot tolerate. He had taken the phone while I slept. He had searched it, and he had found everything. The Bible app that I had forgotten to close. Fragments of search history that I thought I had deleted, but that he had somehow recovered. And worst of all, a note I had written to myself weeks earlier. It was a prayer. I had been so careful, so disciplined about hiding my faith. But one night, the words had been pouring through me so strongly that I needed to write them down. I needed to see them in my own handwriting on a screen. It was a prayer to Jesus, a prayer of surrender and gratitude and love. And Abu Karim had read every word. What followed is difficult to describe. Not because I do not remember it. I remember it with terrible clarity. But because the experience of being confronted with that level of rage and disgust when you are at your most vulnerable, half asleep, disoriented, trapped in a dark room is something that my words may not be able to fully convey. He did not begin with shouting. That might have been easier. He began with a low, cold voice, the voice he used when he wanted to make clear that he was in absolute control. He asked me what was on the phone. He asked me to explain what he had found. He asked me who had done this to me, who had corrupted me, who had poisoned my mind. That question revealed everything about how he saw me. He could not imagine that I had arrived at this on my own. In his understanding, a woman did not think independently. A woman did not seek truth or ask questions or make spiritual decisions without a man directing her. Someone had to have done this to me. A missionary, a secret Christian infiltrator, someone on the internet who had targeted his vulnerable wife. I was terrified. My body was shaking so badly that I could feel the bed trembling beneath me. Every survival instinct I had developed over 7 years was screaming at me to deny everything, to cry, to beg forgiveness, to tell him it was a mistake, a curiosity. A moment of weakness that would never happen again. Every part of me that had learned to survive by submission and deception was telling me to lie. But I could not. Something in me would not let me deny Jesus. Not now. Not after everything he had done for me. Not after the dream. Not after the field of light. Not after the hand and the voice and the words that had saved my life. I had spent my entire marriage saying what Abu Karim wanted to hear. I had spent years telling lies to survive. But this was the one truth I could not betray. I told him that I had been searching, that I had found something real, that I had had a dream, an encounter with God that had changed me. I did not tell him everything. I did not describe the dream in detail or give him the full story of my conversion, partly because I was too afraid, and partly because the most sacred experiences of your life are not meant to be laid out before someone who will use them as evidence against you. What I said was enough, more than enough. His reaction came in waves. First, the interrogation. Rapid, harsh questions fired at me like stones. How long had this been going on? Who had I been talking to? Had I told anyone? Was there a man involved? He kept coming back to that. Was there a man? Because in his mind, the only explanation for a woman's disobedience was the influence of another man. Then the theology. He quoted verses from the Quran about the punishment for apostasy. He recited hadith about those who leave Islam. He told me what the scholars said, what the law said, what God himself said about people who turn their backs on the true faith. He used the word kafir, disbeliever. He used the word murtad, apostate. These words were not just insults. In our world, they were sentences. They carried weight. They carried consequences. Then the anger broke through. He struck me across the face. It was the first time he had fully hit me. In all the years of control and intimidation and threats, he had never actually crossed that line. But now the line was gone. I fell sideways on the bed, my cheek burning, my ear ringing, and he stood over me breathing hard, and I saw in his eyes something I had never seen before. Fear. He was afraid. Not of me, of what I represented. His wife, his property, his possession had slipped beyond his control. Something had gotten inside the walls he had built around me, and he could not get it out. He grabbed the phone from where he had set it on the nightstand, and he smashed it against the wall. The screen shattered. Pieces of glass and plastic scattered across the marble floor. He picked it up and smashed it again, and again, until it was nothing but fragments. Then he left the room and locked the door from the outside. I heard the key turn. I heard his footsteps moving away. I heard him pick up the house phone in the hallway and begin calling someone. I could not hear the words clearly through the door, but I could hear the tone. Urgent. angry, reporting. I sat on the floor of the locked room, my cheek throbbing, my hands pressed flat against the cold marble, surrounded by the shattered remains of my phone, and I prayed. I did not pray with eloquence or theology. I prayed the way a drowning person reaches for the surface. Jesus, you said you would come for me. I am holding on. Please do not let go. And in the terror and the pain and the darkness of that room, the peace came. Not the absence of fear. The fear was overwhelming, but the peace was underneath the fear, like solid ground beneath flood water. I could feel it. Steady, unmovable, a presence that was not affected by Abu Karim's rage or the locked door or the shattered phone or the blood I could taste in my mouth from where he had struck me. The days that followed were the worst of my life. Abu Karim confined me to the bedroom. The door was locked at all times. He brought meals and left them on the floor outside, opening the door just enough to push a tray through, then locking it again. I had no phone, no contact with anyone, no way to reach out for help. He brought people to the house. I heard them arrive, heard their voices in the sitting room, discussing me, discussing what to do with me. I heard Abu Karim's voice agitated, listing my crimes. I heard other voices, calmer, more measured, offering advice. He brought an imam. The man sat outside my locked bedroom door and talked to me through the wood. He lectured me about the mercy of Islam, about the deception of Christianity, about the hellfire that awaited apostates. He told me that I had been manipulated, that what I had experienced was not real, that dreams from the devil can feel very convincing. He urged me to repent, to say the Shahada, to come back to the truth before it was too late. I listened. I did not argue. I did not have the energy for argument, and I knew it would be pointless and dangerous. But I listened to his words, and I compared them to the words I had heard in the dream, and they did not sound the same. The Imam's words were full of threat and fear and punishment. The words from the dream were full of love and rescue and promise. The Imam was telling me to submit out of terror. Jesus had asked me to come to him out of love. The difference was so stark, so unmistakable, that the Imam's lecture actually strengthened my faith rather than weakening it. Abu Karim told me I had two choices. I could repent publicly, recommit to Islam, and we would never speak of this again, or I could face consequences. He did not specify what those consequences would be. He left the threat open-ended, and the openness was itself the weapon. My imagination filled in the blanks with everything I knew about what happened to women in our world who brought this kind of shame upon their families, my father was told. I do not know exactly what Abu Karim said to him, but a message came back to me through Abu Karim, delivered with a cold satisfaction that made my stomach turn. My father said I was no longer his daughter. He said that I was dead to the family. Those words hurt. Even after everything he had done to me, even after selling me, even after years of silence and abandonment. The word dead, spoken by the man who was supposed to protect me, carved a wound that has never fully healed. I had a new father. I knew that. I had been called daughter by someone whose authority far exceeded my earthly father's. But the human heart is not a logical thing. You can know you are loved by God and still grieve the rejection of the man whose eyes you inherited. Now, I need to tell you about two people that God, in his kindness and his planning, I had placed in my life long before I knew I would need them. Two people who risked everything to help me and who I cannot name even now because their safety depends on their anonymity. The first was a woman I will call Miriam. She was my neighbor, living 2 houses down from Abu Karim's house. Miriam was in her 40s, a quiet, gentle woman who belonged to the small Christian community in our area. The kind of Christians who have lived in the Middle East for generations, who keep their faith steady and quiet and enduring in a context that does not make it easy. Miriam and I had never been close. How could we be? I was barely allowed to leave my own house. But over the years, we had exchanged small pleasantries across the wall. A greeting, a plate of food during a holiday, a kind word about the weather. I had always felt something different about Miriam, even before I knew what it was. She had a calmness to her, a warmth that seemed genuine rather than performed. She looked at me with eyes that actually saw me, not through me, not past me, not at the surface of me. When she said good morning, she meant it in a way that went deeper than the words. I did not understand this for a long time. Now I know it was the love of Jesus in her, visible even across a courtyard wall. The second person was a younger woman I will call Layla. She was my cousin on my mother's side in her early 20s, someone I had not been particularly close to growing up. But after my mother's death, Layla had reached out to me a few times, sending messages through relatives, trying to maintain some connection. What I did not know, what I could not have known, was that Layla was herself a secret believer. She had come to faith about 2 years before my crisis, through an online community of underground believers. She had told no one. She lived her double life with the same careful terror that I had been living mine. When Abu Karim confined me, he was angry enough to be careless. He complained about the situation to a relative, not giving every detail, but making it clear that his wife had gone astray, that she had been influenced by outside forces, that she was under correction. Word of this traveled through the family network the way word always travels in our culture, quickly and with embellishment. It reached Layla. Layla understood immediately what was happening. She recognized the language of apostasy accusation. She recognized the danger I was in, and she did something incredibly brave. She sought out Miriam. I do not know exactly how Layla found Miriam or how the connection was made. These are details that were kept from me deliberately for everyone's protection. What I know is that the two of them found each other, recognized in each other the shared faith and the shared urgency, and began to plan. They communicated carefully, using methods I will not describe here. They connected with a network, an underground network of Christians who specialize in helping people in exactly my situation. Believers who have left Islam and are in danger, women fleeing forced marriages and honor violence, people who need to disappear from one life and reappear in another. These networks exist. They are real. They operate in shadows with great personal risk to everyone involved. The people who run them are not dramatic heroes from action films. They are ordinary men and women who go to work and raise their children and live quiet lives, and who also, quietly, save people. They are, I believe, among the greatest examples of Christian courage in the world today, and most people will never know their names. The plan took weeks to develop. Weeks during which I was still locked in that bedroom, still being fed through a door, still being lectured by religious men who wanted to reclaim me for a faith I no longer held. I did not know that a plan was being made. I did not know that Miriam and Layla had found each other. I did not know that a network of strangers was preparing a place for me. All I knew was the four walls of my room and the voice of Jesus, which I heard not audibly, but in the scriptures I had memorized, playing back in my mind like a song I could not stop singing. Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Do not be afraid. for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. Those verses kept me alive. I mean that literally. They kept me alive. Without them, without the words I had stored in my heart during the months of secret reading, I would have broken under the pressure. Abu Karim would have won. The Imam would have won. The fear would have won. But the word of God, hidden in my heart, was stronger than all of it. Abu Karim had a routine. Every Tuesday evening, he went to visit a friend. They would drink tea, play backgammon, talk about business. He was usually gone for 3 or 4 hours. During these absences, he locked me in the bedroom as always, but the house was empty. It was the only time the house was empty. The plan centered on a Tuesday, a specific Tuesday that Miriam and Layla and the network chose based on circumstances I was not fully aware of. A car would be waiting in the alley behind the house. Miriam would be driving. Layla would be with her. I would need to get out through the bedroom window. The bedroom window. Let me describe it. It was high, narrow, meant for ventilation rather than access. It opened onto the side alley between Abu Karim's house and the neighboring property. There was a drop of maybe 2.5 meters to the ground below. The window had a latch but no lock because Abu Karim had never considered it an escape route. In his mind, the locked door was sufficient. A proper wife would not climb out of a window. It would be undignified, unthinkable. He underestimated what a woman will do when she is fighting for her life. The information reached me through Miriam, who managed to pass a note to me through an extraordinary act of courage and ingenuity that I will not describe in detail to protect the method. The note was brief. It gave me a day and a time. It told me to be at the window. It ended with a verse. Isaiah 43:1. Do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. I held that piece of paper and wept, not from sadness, from the overwhelming realization that I was not alone, that God had not only heard my prayer on the rooftop, but had been arranging the answer long before I prayed it. Miriam had been placed 2 houses away years before my crisis. Layla had come to faith months before I needed her. The network had been built by brave men and women long before I knew it existed. Every piece had been set in place by a hand I could not see, and now, in my darkest hour, those pieces were coming together. The Tuesday came. Abu Karim left at his usual time. I heard the front door close. I heard the gate open and his car pull out. I heard the gate close behind him. Then silence. I waited. The note had specified a time, and it was not yet that time. I waited in the dark bedroom, my heart hammering so hard I was certain the neighbors could hear it. I prayed without ceasing. Jesus, be with me. Jesus, go before me. Jesus, make a way. The time came. I went to the window. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely work the latch. I pushed the window open and felt the night air on my face, warm and dry and smelling of dust and jasmine from somewhere in the neighborhood. I looked down at the alley below. It was dark. The drop was further than it had looked from inside the room. I did not hesitate. I know that sounds brave, but it was not bravery. It was desperation. It was Peter stepping out of the boat because the alternative was staying in the storm. I climbed onto the windowsill, my feet dangling, my arms bracing against the frame. I scraped my forearms on the rough concrete. I felt the skin tear, and then I let go. I hit the ground hard. My ankles screamed with pain. I stumbled forward and caught myself on the opposite wall of the alley. For a moment, I could not move. I just stood there, hands flat against the wall, breathing hard, but tasting dust and blood and freedom. Then I heard a whispered voice. My name, not Aisha. The name I would soon take, the name they already knew. Sarah, come, quickly. I ran through the dark alley toward the voice. My legs ached, my arms were bleeding. My hijab had come loose and was trailing behind me like a flag of surrender. I ran, and I did not look back. I could not look back, because I knew that if I looked back, I would see the house, and the gate, and the walls, and the 7 years, and the weight of all of it might pull me back in. I reached the car. A dark sedan parked with its lights off. The back door opened. I threw myself inside. The door closed. The engine started. The car moved. In the back seat, someone took my shaking hands. It was Layla. She held my hands tight and whispered words I will never forget. She told me I was safe. She told me Jesus had me. She said it over and over like a prayer, like a lullaby, like the thing you say to someone who has just been pulled from a burning building. You are safe. Jesus has you. You are safe. Miriam drove, calm, steady, focused. She drove the way someone drives when lives depend on it, carefully, deliberately, without panic, but with great urgency. I did not know where we were going. I had been told not to ask, and I did not ask. I pressed my forehead against the car window and watched the street lights blur past and tried to slow my breathing and could not. We drove for a long time. Hours. The city gave way to highway, the highway to smaller roads, the smaller roads to a neighborhood I did not recognize in a city I had never visited. The car stopped in front of a small, unremarkable house. No signs, no markings, just a plain house on a quiet street. Miriam turned off the engine. In the silence, I could hear my own heartbeat and the ticking of the cooling engine and nothing else. The door of the house opened. A woman stood there, silhouetted by the soft light behind her. She was older, maybe 60, with a round face and calm eyes. She looked at me and she smiled. Not a polite smile, not a careful smile. A smile of pure, uncomplicated welcome. And she said something so simple and so powerful that it broke through every last defense I had. She said, "Welcome home, sister." I crossed the threshold of that house and collapsed. Miriam caught me on one side and Layla on the other, and they lowered me to the floor, and I wept. I wept with my whole body. I wept with my face pressed against the clean tile floor of a stranger's house, surrounded by women whose names I did not yet know, in a city I had never seen, with nothing in the world except the clothes I was wearing and the faith in my chest and the scraped, bleeding arms of a woman who had just climbed out of her own grave. I want to stop here for a moment and acknowledge what I left behind that night, because escape stories can sound triumphant in the telling, and I do not want to pretend that there was not an enormous cost. I left behind every physical possession I had in the world. I left behind my family, what remained of it. My father, who had sold me, my brother, who I loved and who I have not seen or spoken to since, my mother's memory, her grave that I never visited, her belongings that I will never hold. I left behind my name, my history, my identity, everything that had made me Aisha. My family would later declare me dead, not metaphorically, literally. They held a kind of funeral. They mourned me as if I had died, and in their minds I had. The daughter who left Islam, who fled her husband, who became a Christian, that daughter was dead. My name was no longer spoken. My photographs were removed. My existence was erased from the family record as thoroughly as if I had never been born. I know this because word reached me later, through channels I cannot describe. And when I heard it, I grieved. I grieved deeply and honestly and without shame, because you can know that you did the right thing and still mourn what it cost you. You can know that God is your father and still ache for the father who disowned you. You can know that you have a new family and still miss the old one with a fierceness that takes your breath away. But here is what I also know. I know that on that night, climbing out of that window, running through that alley, collapsing on the floor of that safe house, I was not just escaping a marriage. I was being born, painfully, messily, covered in blood and dust and tears. I was being born into a new life. And birth, real birth, always involves leaving one world behind and entering another. I left that house with nothing. Absolutely nothing, and I had never been richer in my life. The woman who ran the safe house was someone I came to know as Mama Grace. That is not her real name. I will not use her real name because she is still alive, still doing the work she was doing when I met her, and her safety is not something I will compromise for any story, even my own. Mama Grace was a former Muslim herself. She had converted to Christianity more than 30 years ago, in a time when doing so was even more dangerous than it is now, if you can imagine that. She had lost her family, her community, her country. She had rebuilt her life from nothing, and then she had spent the rest of it helping other women do the same thing. She was small, round. She moved slowly because her knees were bad. She wore reading glasses that she was always pushing up on her nose. She looked like somebody's grandmother, which is essentially what she was to every woman who passed through that house. But underneath the softness was a spine of iron. This was a woman who had stared down threats, navigated dangers, outsmarted men who wanted her dead, and had done it all with a quiet, immovable faith that made my own look like a candle next to a bonfire. The first night in the safe house, after I had been peeled off the floor and given water and had my scraped arms cleaned and bandaged, Mama Grace sat with me in a small kitchen, just the two of us. She made tea. She did not ask me to talk. She did not ask me questions. She just sat with me and sipped her tea and let me be. The silence was not the suffocating silence of Abu Karim's house. It was the comfortable silence of someone who understands that there are moments when the most loving thing you can do is simply be present. After a long time, I asked her if I was really safe. She looked at me over her glasses and told me something I have never forgotten. She told me that as long as I was in this house, I was under God's protection. She said that many women had passed through this house and not one had been found. Not one. She said that the same God who parted the Red Sea was perfectly capable of hiding one woman from the men who wanted to find her. I believed her. Not because the logic was flawless, not because I understood the security measures, but because I looked at her face and saw in it the same thing I had seen in the eyes of the man in my dream. Love without agenda, strength without cruelty, authority without domination. The family resemblance was unmistakable. She belonged to him. There were other women in the safe house. I will not tell you how many or describe them in detail because their stories are their own, not mine to share. But I will tell you that I was not alone. There were women from different countries, different backgrounds, different circumstances. Some had fled forced marriages like mine. Some had fled families that had threatened to kill them for converting. Some had fled situations I cannot even describe here because the telling would put people at risk. We lived together in that small house, and something happened that I had never experienced before. Community. Real community, not the community of my neighborhood, which was built on social obligation and mutual surveillance. Not the community of my family, which was built on hierarchy and control, but a community built on shared faith, shared suffering, shared hope. We cooked together, ate together, prayed together, studied scripture together, laughed together, cried together. We were strangers who had become sisters, bonded not by blood but by something stronger, by the blood of Jesus who had rescued every one of us. The emotional unraveling when it came was worse than I expected. For years, I had been holding everything together through sheer force of will, keeping the pain compressed, sealed, managed. But safety has a way of releasing what danger keeps contained. When I finally felt safe, truly safe, all of the grief and rage and trauma that I had been suppressing for 7 years came flooding out. I cried for days, not gentle, quiet tears, violent, shaking sobs that came from somewhere so deep in my body that I could feel them in my bones. I cried for my mother. I cried for the girl I had been at 19, dressed in a borrowed dress, being handed to a man old enough to be her grandfather. I cried for the years I would never get back. I cried for the education I never received, the friendships I never had, the life I never got to live. I had nightmares, terrible ones. Abu Karim finding me, the locked door, the imam's voice through the wood, threatening hellfire, the sound of the gate closing. I would wake up gasping, drenched in sweat, and for a few horrible seconds, I would not know where I was, and I would think I was back in that house, back in that room, and the escape had been the dream and the captivity was real. Mama Grace or one of the other women would come. They would sit with me, they would put their hand on my shoulder or hold my hand or sometimes just sit in the doorway so I could see them and know I was not alone. They did not try to fix me. They did not tell me to pray harder or have more faith or get over it. They just stayed. They stayed in the dark with me, and their presence was a sermon more powerful than any words. I also experienced guilt, which surprised me. I felt guilty for leaving, guilty for causing trouble, guilty for putting Miriam and Layla at risk, guilty for being alive when my mother was dead, guilty for being happy on the rare moments when happiness broke through the grief. Because how could I be happy when my family was mourning me as dead, when my brother thought he had lost his sister, when my father was ill and I was not there? It was Mama Grace who helped me understand this. She told me that guilt is one of the enemy's favorite weapons against rescued people. She said that the one who enslaved you will always try to make you feel guilty for being free. She said that Jesus did not die on the cross so that I could spend the rest of my life apologizing for being saved. Slowly, painfully, day by day, I began to heal, not all at once. Healing from the kind of life I had lived is not like healing from a cut or a broken bone. It is more like learning to walk again after years in a wheelchair. Your muscles have atrophied. Your balance is gone. You have to relearn things that other people take for granted. Things like making decisions, things like speaking your opinion, things like saying no. I learned basic life skills that I had never been allowed to develop. How to handle money, how to navigate a city, how to have a conversation with a man without flinching, how to look someone in the eye, how to disagree without expecting to be punished for it. These are things that most people learn as teenagers in the natural course of growing up. I was learning them in my late 20s from scratch, like a child in an adult body. I studied the Bible properly for the first time. Not furtive, terrified glances at a phone screen in the dark. Real study, with a real Bible, a physical one, given to me by Mama Grace. She placed it in my hands and I held it and I cried because it was the first book I had held in years and it was the most important book in the world and it was mine. No one was going to take it. No one was going to smash it against a wall. I read the full story of Scripture, creation, the fall, God's relentless, stubborn, unfailing pursuit of his people through centuries of their unfaithfulness, the prophets calling out in the wilderness, the exile and the return, and then Jesus, God himself, stepping into the mess of human history, putting on human skin, walking on human roads, eating human food, weeping human tears, healing, teaching, touching the untouchable, loving the unlovable, and then the cross, the agony, the darkness, the tearing of the curtain, the tomb, and then on the third day the stone rolled away, the grave emptied, the impossible made real, resurrection. I saw my own story inside that story. I had been in Egypt, enslaved. I had been in exile, far from home. I had been in a tomb, sealed behind stone. And God had come for me just as he always comes, just as he has always come throughout all of history, for every lost and broken and forgotten person who cries out to him. There were certain passages that became so personal to me that I could not read them without weeping. The story of Hagar, the slave woman used and discarded by Abraham and Sarah, wandering in the desert with her dying child, hopeless, alone, and God found her. God saw her. And Hagar gave God a name that no one else in all of Scripture gives him. She called him the God who sees me. El Roi, the God who sees. That is who he is. He is the God who sees the invisible women, the ones behind walls, the ones in locked rooms, the ones whose names are not spoken, the ones who are sold and used and forgotten. He sees them. He sees us. The story of Ruth became precious to me too. Ruth, who lost everything, her husband, her home, her security, who chose to leave her own country and her own people and follow her mother-in-law into an uncertain future, who arrived in a foreign land with nothing and gleaned grain from the edges of other people's fields, living on leftovers and kindness. And God saw her there, in the margins, and gave her a home and a husband and a child and a place in the very lineage of Jesus himself. God took a foreign widow with nothing and made her an ancestor of the Savior of the world. I held that story against my own and marveled. I too had left everything. I too had arrived in a strange place with nothing. I too was gleaning, living on the kindness of believers who owed me nothing and gave me everything. And I dared to believe that God could take my broken, wasted, stolen years and make something beautiful out of them too. I wrestled with hard questions during this time, questions that did not have easy answers. Why did God allow 7 years of suffering before he rescued me? Why not sooner? Why not before the wedding? Why not on my wedding night, or the first year, or the second? Why 7 years of silence and darkness and pain? I will not pretend I have fully answered these questions. I have not. There are parts of God's timing that remain mysterious to me, and I have made my peace with the mystery. But I will tell you what I have come to believe. I believe that during those 7 years, God was not absent. He was at work. He was preparing the dream. He was preparing Miriam, placing her 2 houses away from me years before I would need her. He was preparing Layla, bringing her to faith through an online community so that when the moment came, she would understand what was happening and know what to do. He was preparing the network, the safe house, Mama Grace. He was preparing me, breaking down the false foundations of everything I had been taught, so that when the truth came, I would recognize it. I do not believe God caused my suffering. I believe he allowed it, and I believe he grieved it, and I believe he used it. He took the worst thing that ever happened to me and turned it into the doorway through which I walked into his arms. That does not make the suffering good. It makes God good. There is a difference. The day of my baptism was the most important day of my life. More important than the dream, even, because the dream was something that happened to me. The baptism was something I chose. It did not happen in a church. There is no church building, no steeple, no pews, no organ, no choir. It happened in a borrowed room in a borrowed building in a city that was not my own. There was a large basin filled with water. There were maybe 12 people present, all of them believers, all of them people who could be arrested for being in that room. The risk was real and present and understood by everyone, and they came anyway. They came because a sister was about to be born, and they were not going to miss it. I wore a white dress, simple, inexpensive, nothing special. But when I put it on and looked down at myself, my breath caught because it was white. White like the robes in the dream, white like the light in the field. I had not planned this. No one had planned this. But God, who attends to details that we overlook, had arranged even this. Before the baptism, I was asked to share my testimony, to tell my story to the people gathered in that room. I stood before them, this small collection of brave, faithful souls, and I opened my mouth and the words poured out. Not polished words, not rehearsed words. Broken, stumbling, tearful words. The story you have been reading, the childhood, the sail, the marriage, the silence, the rooftop, the dream, the man in white, the discovery, the confrontation, the escape. I told it all and I wept through most of it, and they wept with me. When I finished, the room was quiet, the kind of quiet that follows thunder. And then one of the women, an older woman I had only met that week, began to sing. Softly at first, then joined by others. A hymn I did not know the words to yet, but that my heart recognized. A song about amazing grace, about being lost and found, about being blind and now being able to see. The pastor asked me what name I wanted to be baptized under. I did not hesitate. Sarah, I said. In the Bible, God changed Sarai's name to Sarah, which means princess. Sarah was old. The world said she was past her usefulness. Her body said she was barren, finished, done, but God said otherwise. God gave her a new name and a new future and a child of promise when every natural circumstance said it was impossible. I told them this. I told them that I had been called barren, that I had been told I was finished, that the world had written me off as a debt payment, a failed wife, a dead daughter. But God said I was a princess. God said He had plans for me. God said the best was not behind me, but ahead of me. And then I stepped into the water. The pastor took my hand. I looked at his hand holding mine, and I remembered another hand, a hand in a dream extended toward me in a field of light. Open, warm, offering. I had taken that hand in a vision, and it had changed everything. Now I was taking another hand, a human hand, a hand that represented the body of Christ on earth. And I was choosing freely, for the first time in my life, to die and be reborn. He lowered me into the water. I felt it close over my face, cool and complete, and for a moment there was silence, the same living silence I had felt at the beginning of the dream. I was under. The old life was under. Aisha was under. The sold girl, the silent wife, the locked room, the shattered phone, the hand across my face, the years of emptiness, all of it went under the water. And then I was lifted up. I came out of the water gasping, blinking, streaming, and the room erupted. Not in loud cheers, they could not be loud. The danger was too present, but in fierce, whispered joy. Hands reaching for me, arms pulling me close, voices saying my new name. Sarah, Sarah, welcome, Sarah. We love you, Sarah. Jesus loves you, Sarah. I stood there dripping, sobbing, laughing, surrounded by people I had known for days or weeks who loved me more than my own blood family ever had. And I understood in that moment what Jesus meant when he said that everyone who has left houses or brothers or sisters or father or mother for his sake will receive 100 times as much. I had left everything, and I had received everything. That was several years ago now. I will not tell you exactly how many or where I am now or the details of my current life, because safety requires vagueness, and I have learned to be comfortable with vagueness. But I will tell you what my life looks like now in broad strokes, because I want you to know that the story does not end at the baptism. The story is still being written. I work now to help other women in situations like the one I escaped, women trapped in forced marriages, women fleeing honor violence, women who have left Islam and are in danger. I am connected to the same kind of networks that saved me, and I do for others what Miriam and Layla and Mama Grace did for me. I listen. I comfort. I pray. I help with practical things, escape plans, safe houses, documents, relocation, and sometimes, when the moment is right, I share my story. I share the dream. I share the name of Jesus. I have sat with women on the worst nights of their lives, women who have just escaped, who are shaking and bleeding and terrified, who look at me with eyes I recognize because I have seen those eyes in my own mirror. I have held their hands and told them what Layla told me in the back seat of that car. You are safe. Jesus has you. You are safe. One moment stays with me. A young woman, barely 20, a freshly arrived at a safe house. She was curled up on a cot, shaking, unable to eat, unable to speak. After a long time, she looked at me and whispered that nobody was coming for her, that nobody cared, that she was going to disappear and nobody would notice. I knew those words. I had spoken those exact words on a rooftop under the stars years ago to a God I was not sure was listening. I knelt beside her cot. I knelt the way he had knelt in my dream. I took her hand the way he had taken mine, and I told her that someone had already come for her. That was why she was here. That someone had moved heaven and earth to get her to this cot, in this room, on this night, and he was not done. He was just getting started. I do not know if she believed me in that moment. It does not matter. The seed was planted. And the God who makes jasmine bloom in neglected courtyards is the God who makes seeds grow in broken hearts. I want to speak now to anyone who is listening to this story. I want to speak to you directly, whoever you are, wherever you are. If you are a woman who is trapped in a marriage, in a family, in a system that tells you that you are property, that you are worthless, that you are less than human, I need you to hear me. I was you. I know the walls. I know the silence. I know the feeling of being invisible, of being erased, of being a ghost in your own life. And I need you to know that God sees you. He knows your name, not the name they gave you, not the name they used to control you, your real name. The name he has for you, and he is working right now, even if you cannot see it, even if you cannot feel it. Not even if the walls are high and the door is locked and the night is long, he is working. Cry out to him, he will answer. He answered me. If you are someone who is searching, if you are asking questions that your religion or your culture or your family does not want you to ask, if you are feeling the ground shift beneath your feet and you do not know where you will land, do not be afraid. Follow the truth wherever it leads, even if it leads you away from everything you have known, even if it costs you everything. What you will gain is more than you can imagine. I know this because I have lived it. If you are someone who has been told that God does not love you, that you are too broken, too sinful, too dirty, too used, too far gone for God to want you, I need you to hear me say this with everything I have. That is a lie. It is the oldest lie in the world, and it is a lie. God crossed every barrier to reach me. Culture, religion, locked doors, high walls, a husband's rage, a father's rejection, and death itself. He crossed all of it. He crosses all of it. For you, right now. Wherever you are reading this or hearing this, if you are a Christian who sometimes wonders if your faith is real, if the God you worship is really there, if any of it matters, let my story encourage you. He is real. He is there. He is active and moving and rescuing and restoring and making all things new. Right now, today, in places you will never see and among people whose names you will never know. Your God is not a theory. He is not a tradition. He is not a comfortable cultural habit. Yeah, he is the living God who walks into dreams and breaks chains and calls the sold and the silenced and the forgotten by name and says, "You are mine." My name used to be Aisha. I was born into a family that loved me in the only way it knew how, which was not enough. I was sold to a man who treated me as property. I spent 7 years in silence and darkness. I cried out to God on a rooftop, not even knowing his name. And he answered. He answered with a dream and a field of light and a hand extended in love and words that rewrote the story of my life. He answered with a neighbor named Miriam and a cousin named Layla and a woman named Mama Grace and a network of brave believers who risked their lives for a stranger. He answered with water and a white dress and a new name. He answered with himself. I was a debt payment. He turned me into a daughter. I was silenced. He gave me a voice. I was sold. He bought me back, not with silver or gold, but with his own blood, poured out on a cross 2,000 years ago for every lost and broken and forgotten soul who would ever cry out to him in the dark. My name is Sarah. It means princess. And every single day that I wake up free, every day that I breathe without fear, every day that I open my Bible without hiding it, every day that I pray out loud in my own voice to a God who knows me and loves me and calls me his own, I am living proof of one simple, unshakable, eternal truth. Jesus rescues. He rescued me. And if you let him, he will rescue you too. My name is Sarah, and this is what Jesus did for me.